Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has announced £84 million of new funding for African and Middle East countries. This in an attempt to tackle the migration crisis at source.
To stop illegal migration, we must also tackle it at source. So today I'm announcing £84 million of new funding for projects across Africa and the Middle East.
Well, there you go, the words of the Prime Minister. And speaking at Blenheim Palace, where leaders have met, or a European Political Community Summit, he said the money will go towards health, education and humanitarian support in African countries and the Middle East.
Well, joining us now is the Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Woolfe. Stephen, this is part of a broader pan-European plan to stop people leaving those North African countries in the first place. Will it work?
Oh, I think anybody that's heard the sum of £84 million and suggests that sum, which is a third or potentially a quarter of what the people smugglers will make this year, will stop those people coming from Africa, would be laughing. And the reason why we're laughing, let me put this in a serious context, Tom and Emily, is that the European Union established a fund similar to what the Labour Party is doing. It's called the Trust Fund for Africa. Since 2022, they've established 248 projects and invested 4.4 billion euros. Think about that, to the 84 million that this Prime Minister is suggesting will stop the boats. And yet, 1.1 million Africans have travelled into the European Union in the last year. If 4.4 billion does not stop 1.1 million coming over, what will £84 million that this government is going to do? And that is why it is simply just a sham, an attempt for Keir Starmer to try and show that he is doing something to stop the boats rather than doing what everybody believes should be done, invoke a deterrence system somewhere.
I mean, 84 million to you and I is a huge amount of money, but it's a drop in the ocean if it's supposed to prevent people from crossing to this country or into Europe from the Middle East and Africa. But also the practicalities of this. We know back in April, May time, the largest contingent of people arriving on boats was from Vietnam.
But yes, in this particular circumstance, yes. So what's he going to try and do? Push it over to Vietnam? The problem about people smuggling is that we know since 2000, we've had 1.1 million people who've applied for asylum in this country. And generally, on the first time that they're dealt with, about 60% of them are rejected. So we have no deterrent to remove them once they have been rejected in first instance. Then we know that the vast majority of those coming across are from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq and Somalia. And we don't have returns agreements with those, just as the European Union doesn't have either. So we can't return these people. So as a consequence of that, if you're from any of the top 10 countries that are coming into the UK, bar India and China, then you're unlikely ever to be returned to those countries. So that's a massive incentive for the people smugglers, who will make vastly more money than the 84 million Keir Starmer does. Keir Starmer needs to be sensible about this and recognise not only that this policy is simply just window dressing, but he needs to come up with something that is definitively an attempt to dissuade those people going with the people smugglers. He has yet to produce anything that will go anywhere near like that.
Now, of course, the Prime Minister has ditched the Rwanda deterrent, that idea for a safe third country with which to deport people to. But it's interesting that the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, recently re-elected head of it, of course, has been speaking about safe third countries herself, speaking about the migration and economic partnership deals the European Union has made with countries like Tunisia and Egypt. Could this not be seen as perhaps a down payment for the start of different deals to allow the return of economic migrants to safe third countries if there is economic investment in those countries?
Well, as I mentioned, Africa has had used over 550-odd billion pounds of investment from various countries across the globe in the past couple of decades. So it's not that the countries aren't receiving huge amounts of money. And in addition, there are members of the African Union who said stop using Africa as a tool for colonial policies, particularly A, in terms of investing in us, expecting us not to be able to do it on our own, or B, in the case of the NHS, taking their nurses and doctors and putting them in the UK. So they regard that as economic colonialism. There is an attempt at what should be done, which is opening up the markets. And we remember what Maloney challenged Macron by saying in certain countries where France has influence, they are actually taxing those countries to pay into France. So if you had free trade, if you had the opportunity for those businesses to receive lower taxation for their businesses that succeeded in Europe, that is a much better way of creating jobs rather than subsidizing. And what it does, it goes to the mentality of those in the European Union, like von der Leyen and like Keir Starmer in this country, who believes that subsidies work better rather than allowing people to rise up and work on their own feet with their own skills and their own ingenuity, but having a fairer playing field to trade in Europe.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Stephen Woolfe, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. I mean, Tom, I don't know about you. You can argue, great, fantastic, £84 million of aid to poor countries in the Middle East and Africa, fine. But don't pretend it's going to stop illegal migration into this country.